Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson, and happy October, everybody. We are officially in the spooky season. We got our Halloween decorations outside. It doesn't really feel like fall yet where we live here in Austin, but fall or not, I hope you're all enjoying the new atmosphere as the veil between worlds thins. Got a good one for you this week. The great Hailey Piper is joining the show to talk about her new book, All the Hearts You Eat, and The Lost Boys, the classic 1987 vampire film directed by Joel Schumacher. We're going to have a good time. We're going to talk about why that story made such an impression on Hailey, what it means now, and have a really nice discussion about the place for sincerity and earnestness in genre fiction that I really appreciated, and I hope you will too. So, a couple of recommendations for you as we start this wonderful October season. I have been rereading After the People Lights Have Gone Off, which is the short story collection by Stephen Graham Jones that's getting re-released this year thanks to Open Road Media. It turns out the Kindle edition of that new release is out right now. You can just go get it. The physical copy, I don't think arrives until December, but I saw the Kindle edition. I really wanted to reread After the People Lights Have Gone Off, and I clicked purchase on that bad boy. And man, I stand by my view that that is one of the greatest solo collections that a horror writer has produced ever. It's incredible. It's just no skips, straight bangers. Stephen Graham Jones doing all kinds of wonderful stuff. It has many of his most famous stories in it. If I had to pick one, though, as a highlight for me, there's a story called The Spider Box, which is about a family that has a box, just a cardboard box that they use to move that begins producing and or attracting spiders at a sort of magical rate, and they have to figure out why it's doing this and what it means. And I'm not going to say anything more than that. It's just go read it. Other great stories in that book, stuff like Brush Dogs, Welcome to the Reptile House, The Black Sleeve of Destiny, which is another one of those amazing Stephen Graham Jones things that starts with just a cool what if hook and goes to a completely unexpected place that I still really don't know how Stephen does it. And I've asked him and I still don't know how he does it. But anyway, After the People Lights Have Gone Off, if you haven't picked up that collection, absolutely get it. Get it in ebook. Wait for the physical copy later this year. It is an essential if you love Stephen Graham Jones, if you love horror short fiction. On the film side of things, I want to direct everybody to a movie on Netflix called It's What's Inside. This just dropped October 4th. It's October 7th as I'm recording this. So just a few days ago, I was lucky enough to get a review screener for this one a few months later than I wanted to. I had some friends who were raving about it at South by Southwest. I didn't get to see it at South by Southwest. Netflix sent me a screener last week, a few days before it premiered. And y'all, this is one of the most fun things you're going to watch this Halloween season. One of the most fun new things, anyway. It is about a group of college friends who reunite because one of them is getting married, and they have like a sort of bachelor party get together kind of thing where it's just their core friend group kind of reconnecting in this big, weird mansion. And one of the friends shows up with a machine, and the machine does some very interesting things that throws the party into immediate disarray. It is funny, it is creepy, it is a solid sci-fi concept wrapped up in a horror story, wrapped up in a dark comedy. It's got Bodies, Bodies, Bodies vibes, if you enjoyed that film from a couple years ago, but it's also my friend BJ Colangelo, the way she put it after she saw it was slumber party movies are back, and it kind of has that vibe. It's very much the kind of movie that you'll just want to have some friends over, pop some popcorn, kick back, cozy up with your pajamas and your blankets, and just watch and have a great time. So After the People Lights Have Gone Off, and It's What's Inside, which is streaming on Netflix now. And that's it for recommendations this week. And let's move over to our interview with the one, the only Hailey Piper. Joining us this week on The Scares That Shaped Us is one of my favorite horror writers working right now. You will know her from books like Queen of Teeth, No Gods for Drowning, The Worm and His King series, A Light Most Hateful, and now, everywhere books are sold, All the Hearts You Eat. Hailey Piper is here. Hailey, welcome to the show.
Hi, Matthew. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I have been reading your stuff for a while now, and I started with the short fiction, and with every subsequent thing that I've read, I've just kind of been in awe of how your imagination works and the way you're able to blend genres and create such emotional resonance while creating so many absolutely horrifying and singular images in my head. And I think the same is true. It's hard for me to describe this stuff. And I think it's true too with All the Hearts You Eat. Like, I want to tell everybody, but I feel like it would take me so long to sort of break down what on earth is going on in that wonderful book. So, if you wouldn't mind giving our listeners a little taste of what they can expect from All the Hearts You Eat.
Sure. It's about a woman, Ivory, who lives in Cape Morning, a tourist town in Massachusetts. And one morning she goes out to the beach to swim before work, and she discovers the body of a teenage girl, Cabrina Bright. And soon after that, she starts seeing a specter around that seems to be Cabrina, and Cabrina's friends confirm that they've been seeing her too around the town. Ivory gets it in her to want to help put Cabrina to rest, see what this ghost wants or needs to move on, which leads her to discovery of something ancient with Kate Morning, and consequences ensue.
Is it a spoiler to call this a vampire book?
No, it's not a spoiler.
Okay.
I've been shouting that all. It's funny because the publisher has not said it's a vampire book. They're like, this is a modern gothic. This is a haunting, and it is those things.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been up and down just memeing and shouting. It's like it's vampires. It's because apparently people have been waiting for me to do vampires. I didn't know that. So I guess it's just now's the time.
This is funny. I was just talking to Rachel Harrison last week, and I told her if I had tried to make a wish list of things that I wanted to read from people, a Rachel Harrison vampire novel would be one, and we have So
Yeah.
Thirsty. And then I was like, Hailey Piper would be good with vampires too. And now we have All the Hearts You Eat. And it is a vampire novel, but it like you said, it's very gothic. It's got that sort of coastal town gothic thing, and it also has this sort of cosmic element. It has
Yeah.
fantasy elements. It has ghost story elements. And reading it, I felt like, wow, there are so many different ways in. I feel like any one of these characters could have been the entry point into this story, and you could have started it from 1,000 different places. And I'm wondering, in your imagination, when you started writing this, where did it start for you? What was kind of the point of attack?
Um, yeah, this one's a weird one in that I didn't start it at the start. I kind of just skipped to a couple parts that were really like the imagery and the emotions were really what were drawing me because I didn't really understand what the project was at first. Um, when Ivory meets another very important character early on in the book, that was kind of the first part I wrote. And when she starts discovering the otherworldly elements, been talking about this is like Twin Peaks meets Carmilla kind of
Hmm.
story. So when those elements kind of merge is really that was the first chapters that I wrote. So that's about a for the final book, that's about like 100 or so pages in was where
Yeah.
I started. But yeah, so I it was kind of just I would yeah, but I didn't know what it was at first. There was a point where I thought I was writing kind of a horror romance, sort of like Queen of Teeth, and it was just going to be kind of this story between Ivory and this other character. But then um Cabrina was already a factor in that, and then Rex and Z, her friends, were kind of at first not going to be POV characters, but then very early on, like within a couple chapters, I was like, there's no way to tell this without getting their point of view as well. And then it just kept growing and growing, and it stopped being about like a horror romance anymore, and it started to become this gothic story, but also just exploring all these queer elements and digging up a lot of my personal demons, and hopefully putting them to rest again. Yeah, this was a much more intense endeavor than I was expecting when I was just first writing, like, hey, let's see where this weird stuff goes.
Well, you mentioned the queer themes, and I think anyone who's read your work knows that that is a thing to expect from a Hailey Piper novel. That is just inherently you and a thing that you always want to explore in some form. But I was really struck by, and look, I'm absolutely cishet white dude over here, not the person to ask or discuss about the queer experience in any way, but you do have these amazing characters, and there are four of them, including Ivory, Cabrina, Rex, and Z, who all come at the trans experience from very different perspectives, even within this small town. And you provide this really wonderful emotional kaleidoscope of how each of them react to the world around them, and each of them react to each other, and the sort of discovery that they have this thing in common. Um, is that something? I know it's just inherent to the way you write, but is it something that you sit down and go, okay, I need these four characters to be this way, and this one has this background, and this one has this background? Or does it just sort of happen, and then you're able to look back at a draft and go, oh, I did that. Okay, how do I sharpen it now?
It's more the latter, because I will not sit down and plan like, okay, these characters are going to be queer. It's just I discover about them as I write them. They tell me who they are. It's just that they usually end up, most of my characters end up being queer because that's just part of my worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as far as them being so different while all being trans, I think the important thing was that there is no one queer experience, there's no one trans experience. We are all different people, we all have different experiences. Um, One of the things that can be frustrating sometimes when looking for books is that there's kind of a mindset that, like, well, there are two kinds of queer books. There's the one where a character is coming out of the closet, and there's the one where they are facing discrimination or persecution. I typically just write my characters, and they're queer characters dealing with whatever horrible stuff is happening in the books, and that's usually something, either awful people or supernatural, but it's not usually seated in bigotry. Because I feel like that's a corner that queer authors get pushed into. Really,
Mm-hmm.
most authors of marginalized backgrounds. Um, this book is an exception where while I had the characters being themselves, as I was looking at their circumstances, I did decide to tackle this because it was just, that was what was coming up. It was like I would have to be betraying the characters and the book to be avoiding it. I don't plan to deal with it again anytime soon. That's just, there are other authors doing that. There are other authors who are tackling that with their books. Specifically as far as like trans authors like Alison Rumpet, Andrew White, Gretchen Felker Martin. There are other trans authors who are just, they are tackling that. I don't need to be doing that too. They've got it. Like their books are incredible, and like I trust them. But like the next book after this one that has a trans character is like, it's just, she just happens to be trans. It's not like dealing with the same subject matter that All the Hearts You Eat is dealing with.
Even beyond those issues, there is a wonderful, and it's in A Light Most Hateful too, but A Light Most Hateful goes so crazy so fast that I almost didn't I felt it, but it was sort of a secondary to everything else that the characters are going through. But All the Hearts You Eat has this wonderful coastal town, kids getting into trouble kind of vibe to it. And you mentioned Twin Peaks, and it has that same. If you look at all of Laura Palmer's high school friends in Twin Peaks, it kind of has that same vibe to it, where there are seances in graveyards
Yeah.
and little romantic trysts that happen off to the side, and parents reacting in different ways to different things people get up to, and it's just so as dark as the book can get, and it can get quite dark. I just wanted to hang out with these people. I just wanted to go, oh man, Rex and Z are doing that. Yeah, let's go see what they're doing. Like I would love to hang out. And you have you have a way of doing that I find really, really endearing. And I'm sure we'll talk about it more when we get to our chosen horror story here in a minute. But um I wanted to ask what your sort of, oh gosh, how do I put this? You mentioned Twin Peaks, but I wanted to ask what your sort of personal and creative connections are to places like Cape Morning and the environment that you're able to create with these characters.
Well, as far as the character stuff, I think the important part is just to not betray them. And I don't mean nothing bad happening to them, but I mean just letting them make the choices that come naturally to them, even if it completely wrecks what I thought I was going to be doing with the story.
Hmm.
Um, because I'll write something and then I'll walk away from the computer and I will just be bothered and I won't know why. And then I have to kind of realize, and this has happened so many times, you'd think I'd realize more quickly. I was like, I wrote the character doing something that they wouldn't do.
Hmm.
And I think that creating that atmosphere is really just about letting them be themselves and letting them go on whatever journey they do and having to just kind of adjust my plans for them. As far as the setting stuff, I'm always drawn to the coast for some reason. I find that to be such an interesting, almost liminal space, like just that the beach, the water meeting land. There's just something that feels right for horror stories about it. Even like when I see it in my head, it is gray. It is both scary and beautiful. There's just some atmosphere there that I just feel is just the right place for horror. And I have to resist setting all of my stories by the sea,
Hmm.
because I will just do it. Like it'll just happen. So I have to pull myself back from that. It's like, okay, let's set it in a city, like a little further away from there. Let's set it in a small town. But also you have to indulge too.
And it adds, I think you're right, it adds this certain otherworldliness. And that brings me to you're so good at world building, and you're so good in particular at building this kind of cosmic strangeness that slowly seeps into a book, and this is no different. But and listeners, if you read this book, you're going to get all of the Hailey Piper weirdness that you want mixed in with this very particular take on vampire lore. And I am a total nerd for vampire lore and the way that different authors play with the vampire. Rachel Harrison just did it. Nat Cassidy's done a version of it. Keith Rawson's about to do it. Stephen Graham Jones is about to do it, and you've played with it here. Did you have a moment where you were getting kind of hyper nerdy about, okay, how does my vampirism work and what does it mean? Or were you just having fun playing with that subgenre?
I think the way I approached it was, what do I want to do? Like, because there are so many elements to vampires that I was kind of just like, what do I want mine to have? Like, what are their circumstances? And some of that came out based on like decision making. Some of it came out of like, what do I know that they're doing in the story? But like for example, like I made a conscious decision, like, I don't want them to be like turning to ash in the sunlight. I mean, that's just, I don't, I just didn't want that for them. I like them being weaker by the sunlight, but I think possibly because I also know vampire lore and just knowing the fact that they made that up for Nosferatu, kind
Hmm.
of just made it so it's just like I can't take that seriously for when I'm making vampires. Like there's just they can't be turning into dust by the sunlight just because they decide to do that for a movie in 19, I think 17. Um,
Somewhere in there, yeah.
yeah, so I was just like, no, that's I'm not doing that. They're not doing that.
Speaking of vampires, we're going to go ahead and transition over now. This is a podcast about the stories that made horror writers. And when I asked Hailey what she wanted to talk about, there was a little bit of time away to think about it. And you came back with The Lost Boys, the 1987 film from director Joel Schumacher, starring Kiefer Sutherland, Jason Patrick, Jamie Gertz, the great Diane Wiest, both Corys, if you know the Corys from the 80s. A delightful 80s vampire comedy action horror romp. So I want to start by asking, as we discussed The Lost Boys, what was your first experience with it, and when was your first experience with it? What do you remember about that?
I was pretty young. Because they used to show it on TNT every now and then,
Hmm.
separate from Monster Vision for like which I didn't understand when I was little. I didn't know why there was a difference between like this is significant, this is for Monster Vision. Um, but yeah, it was I don't think it was I came into it like it already started. So I missed like the cold open when they go after the security guard.
Hmm.
But it's just like, yeah, them just coming into the town is kind of just this like, back then you could just be channel surfing and pop and just kind of stumble upon things. And because there wasn't any like there's no button that you could hit on the remote that would tell you what it was underneath. It kind of just be a lot of times where I'd just be like, what is this? And I'd always just be fascinated by like whatever movie was going on. And that happened with like the original Planet of the Apes. That happened with the Blob remake, where I just like I didn't know what I was watching at first. And it was just kind of happening. So that was how I came upon this, but I might have been 7, I might have been 8, I might have been 9, I'm not sure. But yeah, it was just like switched to TNT, just like them coming into town. Um, and I was just like, what is going on here? And yeah, just being really drawn in by because the thing is, I didn't know it was a vampire movie.
Hmm.
And it's so weird to think of that like these days, we're not knowing what a movie is when you start watching it. um, I had to get to a certain point before I realized, oh my God, they're vampires. Which was kind of a neat thing to discover. It's kind of like if you got to see like From Dusk Till Dawn without anybody telling you what it was about.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
Hey, anyone listening to this, if you don't know what From Dusk Till Dawn is about, go watch it. Don't let anyone ruin it for you because that's amazing. I'm sorry, Haley, go ahead.
no, you're fine. Yeah, so it was not my first encounter with vampires in movies. I actually think my first was the Bela Lugosi Dracula. Um, but it definitely left an impression where I was just like that was the first point where I realized like vampires could mess with your head. Like in the scene where they bring Michael into the hideout and they're
Hmm.
giving the food and it's like, oh, how do you like those maggots? Um, just stuff like that. And like it was also kind of in that case, definitely the first time I'd seen like more of a modern vampire. Like this is pre-Buffy, like pre a lot of stuff. Um, but yeah, but I think a big part of that movie that makes it work so well is the setting. That is also a coastal setting. They've got the boardwalk and the carnival stuff and just it's so full, like all the scenery stuff is so full. from like the grandfather's house to
Mm-hmm.
like the stores to the vampire hideout to just everything's very full of I don't want to say memorabilia, but there's stuff everywhere. Like it's very
Yeah.
busy. It's very visually busy without things having to move all the time. And I really like sets like that. Bram Stoker's Dracula is another vampire movie where like the scene the setting stuff is very rich. Like the sets, they're full of props. There's
Mm-hmm.
just a lot going on there. Not necessarily that it's like that it's in important stuff, like it's not like you're going to get clues to the story necessarily, but it just feels lived in, and that makes it feel more real despite also feeling kind of dreamlike at times. And that's something that definitely influenced all the Heartsuite, where I wanted it to feel like this dreamlike sense. And I think the ocean really helps with that, um especially when they're like doing the motorcycle chase and uh Michael almost goes over the ledge and stuff, and it's just like it feels like that's a bottomless pit. Same when they're under the train tracks.
Under the
Like
yeah.
it just feels like it doesn't feel like they're gonna fall and hit the ground. It feels like there's just no bottom. It's very otherworldly. And that's the kind of stuff that just like that would scare me when I was younger. Not like I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have nightmares about it, but more just like that was what would get my heart racing. That and Kiefer Sutherland, because he's just menacing through this whole movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was gonna bring up the seaside town thing anyway, the fictional city of Santa Carla, which is,
Yeah.
and
Murder
it's
capital of the world.
murder capital of the world, Santa Carla, California. Um, if all the bodies were to stand up around here, we'd have a big population problem.
There's so many
Um,
great lines.
oh, it's so wonderful. And I was gonna mention that I love the bric-a-brac
Yeah, yeah, that's a
of
good word
everyone's,
for it.
even like the dashboards of cars
Oh yeah.
have all this stuff, and it's just such an interesting, it's a movie that likes to juxtapose that feeling of youthful innocence with this kind of ancient quality, which of
Yeah.
course is the paradox of the vampire, is like they're perpetually, they look like a bunch of teenage metalhead hoodlums,
Right.
but we don't even really know how old they are. They're just these constant figures who get to be that way, and they live in a hotel that collapsed in the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, and it's got all these old chandeliers, but there's a poster of Jim Morrison on the wall,
Right. They've
and
clearly decorated.
they've clearly decorated. Jim Morrison, I think, is a key influence on that movie for a few different reasons. But and then you get to Grandpa's house, and Grandpa is also, he feels like someone who's lived there forever, and his house
Yeah.
is this amazing museum of all this crazy stuff, and uh, it's such an interesting way to tell you that, like, this is a dying town. It's been here forever. It's kind of crinkly and crummy around the edges, but there's also this secret group of people who are like, hey, you can live forever if you just come hang out with us and pass our initiation, which is another fun thing about it. It's like a teen gang movie. There's an initiation and everything. um
Plus, the funny thing, once you know what's going on, like once you know some of the twists for later in the movie, it like makes sense why some of that stuff happens with the initiation and such. Because like when I remember when I was little, I was like, I remember David being nastier than he actually is to Michael, because he's a little intimidating, but then he's like, come on, Michael, let's go. Like, don't like you want to be one of us, don't you? Like it's a different kind of antagonization. I mean, obviously he shows worse and worse colors as the movie goes on. But like for those first victims, like you don't see the vampires flying. It's very much just like, first person, like just floating down on the car, tearing off parts of the car and then taking the people away.
yeah,
Like there's a couple scenes of that.
I also love how sort of deep the bench is, not just in terms of the actors, but it's a movie about all these characters contending with weird transitional phases in their lives. Like, Obviously
Yeah.
Michael is sort of the center point in that he's a teenage boy. He just wants to have a good time and fit in, and he sees this beautiful girl that he wants to get to know, and then he ends up hanging out with a gang of vampires, and he doesn't really know what's happening to him. And there are wonderful sequences of him adjusting to being a sort of half vampire. But then you have his little brother Sam,
Right.
played by Corey Haim, who is having the experience of, I hate my new town. I liked my old town. I don't understand why we had to live here. And then you have his mother, their mother Lucy, Diane Wiest, who is just trying to get her groove back.
Yeah.
She's just an 80s mom trying to meet a nice man who owns a video store. And if only she could make it work. And I find I think a lot of people think of it as sort of a corny movie, and I guess it can be in some ways, but in terms of a character piece, it has these really satisfying parallel threads running through it for this entire family.
Absolutely. It's the dynamic between Lucy and her sons, I think, is very interesting, and her and with her and her father. Because she's just a very like, yeah, she is trying to just make it work. She's a very gentle person. Like Max even says it when she comes into the video store for the first time. It's like you have a generous you have a generous soul or generous attitude. And even when she scolds them when she comes home, like from rushing away from the first date because Michael is floating out, Michael's floating outside the windows. She really barely scolds them because she really just wants everything to kind of just function. Um, and she's trying to be the glue that holds it together, which I just like it. It's yeah, I have heard people say that. I don't feel that way with this movie. Like I don't think it's corny. I think, I mean, maybe Saxophone Guy, but I mean everybody loves Saxophone Guy.
Everybody loves Saxophone Guy.
Um, but it's just the funny thing is like the other 80s vampire movie that I deeply love is Fright Night. And when somebody calls that one corny, I'm like, yes, I agree. But it's also really like cool and sexy and interesting. This one, I'm like, yeah, I don't see it as much, but maybe that's because I grew up with it versus Fright Night I didn't see until I was like in my late 20s, early 30s. Um, but yeah, this one was just like, when you see this in like the early 90s, like when you see the Michael David's gang and stuff, you're like, oh yeah, that's what cool people look like.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the interesting thing about Fright Night is a movie tied to that old sort of 1950s, 1960s horror host Peter Cushing
Oh
Hammer kind
yeah,
of vibe. So it's deliberately throwing back certain elements to the previous generation of vampire movies. And I
right.
think Lost Boys is so it is working so hard to be a modern thing
I
in.
think it succeeds at least at its time. Like
Mhm.
it's very, I think, I absolutely agree because they're going over like in Fright Night, they're going over the vampire rules as far as what they know from a TV show because they're trying to convince somebody that vampires aren't real. And when they, engaging with this horror host who's kind of, he's going to be out of work and such, and like, and the fact that Jerry Dandridge the vampire lives in like essentially a freaking mansion
Yes.
that just happens to be in the middle of this suburban neighborhood. Um, Whereas the Lost Boys, it does feel very much like its own entity. Like it does want to cut those strings and just be its own creation. And I do think it succeeds largely. I don't think there's a lot of I think that became the influence for a lot of stuff afterward, like vampires in like the 90s and such.
Yeah, yeah. And like you said, like it is so steeped in, it was made in, what did I say earlier, 87?
Yeah.
Yeah, 87. And if you know, I was born in 86, but I'm a little bit of a student of 80s pop culture. And if you had gone to see that movie, if you were like 16 years old and gone to the mall to see The Lost Boys in 1987, and you saw trying to seduce the cute girl on the beach, riding motorcycles, ch playing chicken with death on a railway bridge, and a jacked dude covered in oil playing a saxophone and singing a power ballad, you would have been like, "Yeah, this is cool." And I still like I had the sort of opposite thing where I was not allowed to watch horror movies as a kid. So The Lost Boys was not something I came to until I was maybe 20. And even then I was like, this is cool. This is and it has jokes to be sure. There are a lot of which, you know, we can talk about the Frog Brothers and how great they are. But even
Okay, but like, sorry, I shouldn't interrupt you.
no, go ahead.
But just like, even though, like, I do think the Frog Brothers, a lot of the stuff with them is comic relief, but it doesn't feel like it because the comic relief is that they take themselves so damn seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, and you mentioned Fright Night is they're trying to learn about vampires from what they see on TV. In The Lost Boys, they're learning about vampires from a comic book,
Yeah. And
which
something about that
also
feels more like how you learn from a cursed tome or something.
it feels like a thing that kids that age would pass around to one another and
Yeah.
go, "Hey, no, look, this is actually the real deal." And I also just enjoy a movie that you were talking about the Frog Brothers taking themselves so seriously. And it culminates it there the comic relief there culminates in the great scene where Max is over for dinner and they're trying all of these stealthy ways to prove that he's a vampire, including feeding him raw garlic that they told him was cheese and all of this stuff. And that's a really funny moment, but I think the thing that makes it so endearing is The Lost Boys as a movie, and this is something I think a lot of movies of this kind of lost now. The movie is never looking at you and going, "Isn't this stupid what we're doing?
Right.
In
Exactly.
this like just a goofy, dumb thing that we're doing?" The movie is like, "No, no, no, this actually is life or death. And if they don't figure this out, they probably are going to die and become vampires. And we need you to engage with it on that level. And if you're able to meet the movie there, it's really satisfying."
Absolutely. That's funny because that was one of those, that was like my earliest memory of like discussing the rules of vampires. I don't know why, but that particular scene stuck in my head as a child of
Hmm.
just like, yeah, you gotta use scientific method. Um, but but no, I agree because there have been a couple movies in the past few years that people on social media be like, oh, this is like the heir to the Lost Boys, like this is the successor to that. And I watch them and I'm like, this does not take itself this feels like it thinks it's a joke.
Yeah.
And that's the problem I have. Like, I cannot, Boys of County Hell, I think it's called. This Irish vampire movie from a couple of years ago, and everybody was hyping it up a lot. And so I watched it, and I was just like, the middle of the movie, the tone is kind of when Ash is alone in the house in Evil Dead 2, and there's just a bunch of zany stuff happening, and I'm just like, it just felt like they couldn't commit. Even though the climax of that is really neat, by that point you're not really taking the vampires seriously anymore, in my opinion at least. Like I was kind of out of it by then because like, yeah, it's cool that the master vampire is like just able to just pull blood out of people, but by that point they'd made the vampires such a joke that it didn't register. And the same is true for I think it's either Brooklyn versus Vampires or Vampires versus Brooklyn. People were
Yeah.
also talking that one up as being like, oh, this is as good as The Lost Boys. And I watched it and I was just like, again, they treat it like a joke. They don't, it's like they don't want you to be too scared, and they don't want you to make fun of them for taking it too seriously.
Hmm.
And the thing is like Kids Against the Monsters, I love that when the monster is feels like it's a genuine threat. And that's like the hard part. It's they gotta feel like they're a genuine threat. Like with It Chapter One, that
Hmm.
came out a few years ago. Like that felt like Pennywise can kill these kids. Like they felt like they were in genuine danger, and throughout the whole movie. Like there was not a like Pennywise thought he was a joke, but the movie doesn't treat him like a joke. And that's for me the difference. And I'm just like, I don't feel like this movie treats the vampires as a joke, because and the rare points where the characters take it too lightly, they find out they're wrong.
Hmm.
Like with the garlic, when the vampires, like at the end when they lay siege to grandpa's house, and they're trying the garlic and it just doesn't do anything, but then they push the vampire into the bathtub of holy water, and that does
Hmm.
work, but it's horrifying. And like it's not like they're like laughing about it. It's like he bounces up out of the water and he's like melting. And they've run because they're freaked out. Um,
Yes.
and so stuff and even even after they've taken care of most of the vampires, you got that wonderful like red lit scene of David and Michael fighting, and it
Hmm.
feels threatening. It feel like Kiefer Sutherland is still scary and intimidating in that scene.
Yes.
Um, and it's just like, yeah, you got to keep the threat there. You got to commit to it. You have to not be afraid that people are going to laugh at you for caring about what you're doing with with your art. um like it's so easy to just wink at the audience, or have the characters like, I don't know, quip or whatever. I just, but I think that really is the death of sincerity.
This is something I wanted to ask you about as you were talking about this, because anyone who follows Hailey on social media will know that Hailey is very much an advocate for sincerity and earnestness in genre fiction.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to sort of second guessing your genre fiction in terms of how a publisher might receive it or how an audience might receive it, and if you worry that your work is too weird or too emotional or too gross or anything like that. Have you, I know that you believe very strongly in this, is what I'm getting at. um it sounds like The Lost Boys is a key component of sort of forming that worldview for you. Or are there other horror stories that you love that have really made shaped that feeling of like, okay, no, just make the thing you want to make. Don't try to ham it up or second guess it. Just do it.
Yeah. I mean, you mean like formative stuff? Because like I feel like um
Well, I mean, like, I made a point once to some friends, which I was being sort of half serious, but the more I said it, the more I believed it, which was, if you have ever seen the Broadway musical Cats live on stage, it is an absolute commitment to that concept. They're not going, look, I know we're all dumb. They're not going, yeah,
right.
this is goofy and silly. They are 100% committed to that concept. And I think that's part of what made it one of the most successful things to ever happen in its form.
Right.
And
People weren't going to keep coming back for decades for something that they were treating like Troll 2 or something.
yes, yes, exactly. So I was like, in horror fiction, there are certain stories for me that I come across and I'm like, that is so weird and specific, and it just proves for me, hey, shoot your shot, because you never know what you're going to be able to make that someone else relates to.
Right.
So what are the stories for you that are like that?
Just with being thrown out there, like I mean the big one for me like is like the Hellbound Heart. Um
Mm,
because this is a book where it's Clive Barker's coming at it from like it is immediately sexual. It is um arcane. It is about people who are very flawed, between from varying from just jealousy to murderous. Um, and there's not really a point where it stops taking itself seriously, even though you've got unexplained dimensions opening, you've got bells that herald these explorers of experience. The hierarchy of them is never really properly explained. But there's not a point where it ever feels like Clive Barker stops believing in it. And I think that's what I look for when I'm reading stuff, because, and I'm not going to name books, but there are books where I've read them and it just feels like either in the prose or something about it is just makes it feel like the author is embarrassed to be writing this.
Hmm.
And they make that clear because they don't want you to make fun of them. I think it's more prevalent in movies. Um, but it is definitely a thing that can happen in the written word as well, where it just feels like the author has to make it out to be like, don't worry, I feel this is silly too. And it's just like that is the immediate thing that just completely kills it. Like, well, if you don't care, why should I care?
Hellbound Heart is essential reading for that reason and for so many others. It's wonderful. Um, so, in your experience as a writer, working your way up and building your reputation and your audience, have you ever had moments where you've had to sort of fight back against your own embarrassment? Has that ever been a concern for you?
I mean, probably when I was younger when I was writing, but once I mean, I think the closest equivalent is when I published my first novella, The Possession of Natalie Glasgow.
Hmm.
And it wasn't a matter of embarrassment, but I was overly concerned with how people were going to handle queer elements, so I cut them out. Um, but as far as like, is this too weird, or is this, yeah, I mean, I guess weird is really as like the key component there. Um, Not really, because when I'm watching something, reading something, looking at a piece of art, I try to engage with it on its level, and typically that's not difficult for me. I have a very easy suspension of disbelief. Like you really have to break things hard. So I'm ready to accept things. What like I'm happy to meet the art where it is. It's just that when it then so when I come to it that way and it then is like, well, I'm not getting down there with you. I'm too cool and smart. Like I'm not like those other books. I don't care about things. That for me is like it's kind of a betrayal, because I was like, I came here willingly. Whatever strangeness you were gonna bring, I'm happily there for it. Um, but as far as for my stuff, I mean, if there was, I really don't think so, because I'm thinking back to like, I think Queen of Teeth is really like the one where it's like once you write that, you kind of can't go back. Um, and it's just, and I'm trying to think if there was a point in it where I was like, is this too much? And I don't think so, because the initial concept was more people having vagina dentata than just the main character. And I only narrowed it down because I wanted to focus on her as having a unique situation.
Hmm.
But at that point, it was just like, if you're doing that, you're just doing everything. So I was like, yeah, we're just gonna, pour in Looney Tunes references and, tentacle sex and, whatever goes on with the character, have it be a talking vagina monster, like, and not in the sense of like, this is silly. It's like, no, this is serious. I want you to take this seriously. I want this character to endear to you. I want you to care what happens to them, and I want you to take this world like, and it's not that there's no sense of humor in that book. There is, but it's not at the expense of itself. It's because the characters, because Yaya is sarcastic. It's because Doc is very serious person, and sometimes things are humorous because a person is serious. It's because Magenta is very single-minded about things, like when she's has a craving for peanut butter, and how that can create problems for the characters. Like once you start just being like, I'm just going to dump my personality unapologetically into a book, there's not really a point where you can turn back from that. Like after that point, like how can I be embarrassed about anything I write? Like how's there been a chance for that after that point? Um, I think the only concern sometimes is like, my thing is like, create the art and don't worry about who's going to come to it. It'll be for someone. I do think that it's important to make it so that it has the ability to communicate with the reader. That's very important. But what you're communicating should be earnest.
Well, I think you also just cut a pretty good ad for Queen of Teeth. So if anyone hasn't,
That wasn't on purpose.
no, but if anyone hasn't read Queen of Teeth, you should definitely get on that as well. But yeah, that was something I really wanted to talk to you about. Thank you for that answer. That was wonderful. And it sort of is the opposite side of the same coin of something I'm always harping about with audiences, which is audiences. And I think certain media trains them in this way, but they have this idea that watching a horror film or reading a horror novel is somehow a contest between you and the story, that you have to beat it either by
Right.
proving that you're not scared or proving that you're smarter than that. And I was talking recently to someone about something I love, and it sort of ties into what you said about the first time you saw The Lost Boys. Is one of my favorite things to do is to be able to sit down and watch a new horror film with absolutely no knowledge of what I'm about to
Yeah,
see. It is a wonderful experience, and because of my job I don't get to do it very often, but occasionally you can just sit down and go, all right, I know the title and I maybe know a couple of people who are in it. Just show me this. And
exactly.
if you just let it hit you, you can have these amazing emotional experiences. But
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
my I have a theory about that, and I think it's that some people um are afraid to feel afraid.
Mm,
Um, I think that they don't want the movie to affect them or the book to affect them, so they don't let it happen. They'll be on their phones, they'll make jokes, they'll make sure they're talking to somebody, because that way there's a buffer. And then afterwards, like, well, that wasn't scary. And it's like, well, of course it was. You didn't give it a chance.
yeah.
You have to let it, like they say at the beginning of the new Interview with the Vampire series, let it seduce you. Um, but I do know what you're talking about, because that is one of there are so many interesting ones coming out. And sometimes if it just has a visual style, then or people are recommending it, that's enough. I often don't know what horror movies are about. I often don't know what books are about. I'll start a book because a bunch of people I trust, or a couple people I trust, recommended it to me, and I'll just read it, because I'll give it a chance, because um it's the unknown of it is does make me nervous. It does feel like you're on the precipice of something, but I love that. Like that's part of why I'm a horror fan, because I want to be immersed. I want the feeling of these surprises, and these like, I'm somebody who doesn't really care for surprises in real life, but I do like them when I'm reading fiction or I'm watching
Yeah.
fiction. Um, Longlegs, for example. I got to watch that knowing nothing about it whatsoever. I knew Nicolas Cage was in it. I knew Micah, I can't remember her last name.
Monroe.
Monroe, I think. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. I knew those two were in it, and I knew a couple of like the screenshots. Like, so I knew a little about the look of the movie. That was all I knew. I knew nothing else. And so every moment of it felt like this could be a big moment. And it's one of those movies that rewards that, because it's so steeped in dread, and it's so patient about what it's doing, that ultimately, like when you have something that's being put together like that, sometimes the plot doesn't matter because you're already horrified by the feelings of it. And that's one of the best things about horror is that it is one of there are two genres I feel that emotion is the biggest part of them, and they are the genres most aligned with emotion. That's romance and horror. And it's really cool that horror is something that you can just feel so many emotions with. You can feel rage, you can feel fear, you can feel wonder and awe and admiration and triumph and despair. And it is, and it cares more about the emotions sometimes than the story. And I just think that's really cool about horror. And that's why I'm like, why would you want to be on your phone or joking around with somebody or distracting yourself from it when you could be having this incredible experience?
Yeah.
And the same goes for horror books because I will sit there and be immersed and I will lose track of time. I was up till 2 in the morning last night finishing the audiobook for We Used to Live Here.
Mm.
Um, and it was just like, because you can just completely fall into it. And I know that for different people, they have their different genres that's they're like that for. Horror is it for me, and and horror can seep into any of the other genres. It can sneak in there when you're least expecting it. You can have something that is another genre, and then suddenly it's a horror movie for a few minutes, or it's got a suspense line that does feel like horror. And you know the difference because you're feeling it because the atmosphere is there. And I just think that's just wonderful. I think it's amazing that we can do that with something that we're just coming up with. It's just imagination, but it makes your heart race.
Yeah, it's yeah. We love horror on this show. In case you hadn't figured it out yet, listeners, we love it. Um, and that what you just said made me circling back to the Lost Boys. One of the things that I think I love so much about it, and I alluded to earlier, is it is if you stripped all the vampires out of it and just made David kind of a
A
nasty
gang
guy,
leader.
it would be a perfectly good coming of age movie that
Yeah.
could have, but then you throw the vampires into it and you add that feeling. When you're a teenager, you have that feeling that everything is life or death. Everything is the most important thing that's ever happened to you. And the Lost Boys is able to bring vampires in as a really wonderful metaphor for that. And it just works so well. Do you have a favorite, before I let you go, do you have a favorite moment from the Lost Boys, a favorite scene, a favorite scare, anything like
That's
that?
hard because there's honestly so many good scenes in that movie. Because I just we watched it last week for or the other week for this podcast, and it's so funny because it had been a few years, and for whatever reason I remembered it as like kind of a 4-star movie for whatever reason. And I
Hmm.
watched it this time and I was just like, this is a really freaking good movie. Like this is a 5-star movie for me. Like now it's just like there are so many incredible moments. I probably just jump between a few of them, honestly, because I don't think I can pick one because there are like loud moments I love where like the motorcycle chase I think is really just great intensity
Hmm.
and such. Um, but I love quiet bits, especially when you know like you kind of know what's coming, like when Lucy is in the video store and she's first getting Max's attention. Um, or when Sam is kind of wandering the comic book store and you see the Frog Brothers kind of like scoping him out as just like it's just neat because it's just this feeling. I there's one of the moments I love is when they first get into town and Michael asks a guy any work around here and the guy's like nothing legal. And that just says so much about the rest of the movie. Um, but I mean honestly though, I don't think you can beat the ending. The
Oh, the
final line,
ending.
Grandpa's final line is just it's the perfect punctuation mark to the movie because it tells you so much that it's almost a twist, honestly. Um,
Yeah,
and then it cuts to credits.
it's wonderful. I Bernard Hughes as Grandpa is such a wonderful. I That's who I want to be when I grow up. I want to practice taxidermy and drive my jalopy around town to hit on the local widows and just eat my Oreos and read my TV guide in peace. He's wonderful. My favorite moment, and this is I think a Joel Schumacher thing, which thank goodness Joel Schumacher is kind of getting his flowers now as a filmmaker because he made so many wonderful movies, but he always had that saddle of like
Right.
The Batman movies are bad and they're gay and like of course they're gay. He
Yeah,
was
he is
gay,
gay. Yeah.
but people are gaining a new appreciation for those, and I feel like The Lost Boys keeps growing in esteem. He had this ability to keep that earnestness, keep that sincerity, but still dial everything up to 11. And we talked about it a little bit before, where they push the vampire into the holy water tub
Yeah.
and he starts to melt. And that's my favorite moment in the movie because it's not just that they push him into the tub and he starts to melt. It's not just that he then gets out of the tub and is screaming in agony while his skin is coming off his face. It's that somehow that vampire holy water reaction is so powerful that every toilet and sink in the house erupts and it's like blood water shooting up out of every possible plumbing fixture.
Yeah.
And that is to me that is the genius of Joel Schumacher, that he's like no, it has to be like an epic thing where this happens. And beyond that, I love any movie. There's a movie I saw. Oh, I can say it. I can say it now, I think. No, I won't. I won't say it because I don't want to spoil it for you if you see it. But I just saw a movie, a horror movie that ends with what I call ending with a Home Alone, where it's just like, okay, we're all in this house and now we have to stop the monsters. And The
Yeah.
Lost Boys does that. That's pre Home Alone, but The Lost Boys ends with a Home Alone. And I love the whole idea of in Nightmare on Elm Street is kind of the same vibe of like, we're going to set a bunch of traps. We're going to stop the bad
Yeah.
guys. And that's just a blast. That's just wonderful. Any other observations about The Lost Boys that you want to throw in?
Um, I guess just that with what I was saying about atmosphere is true for that movie as well. The atmosphere created for Santa Carlo is um is why it would make such a good coming of age movie even without vampires, is because you have this feeling that is just weighed down over the town because it is a dying town. Um, and I think that again that it is a good story, but regardless of the story, that's part of what makes it such a great horror movie.
Do you think that Santa Carla being a coastal town and having such a potent atmosphere is a big reason why you keep going back to it in your stuff?
Possibly. I have not gotten to go to the beach much in my life. I have a bunch, but not like I don't know, not as much as I could. But not as much as most of us wish we could, I suppose, either. But yeah, I just yeah, probably it just that was just very that part very much stuck with me, I think, with just like this is what being by the ocean is. It's just that there's anything could happen there. It's just it's the that more than Halloween or whatever else is kind of that thin veil between worlds.
Haley, before we let you go, I know you have a book out this month. We're releasing this in early October, All the Hearts You Eat, and you're going to be doing, I'm sure, lots of fun stuff to promote it. So let the people know where they'll be able to find you online and what you've got coming up.
Well, I try to update my website as much as I can, www.haileypiper.com. On Twitter, I'm at Hailey Piper Says. On Instagram and TikTok, I'm at Hailey Piper Fights. And then after All the Hearts You Eat, I will have we haven't nailed down a release date yet, but my kind of erotic cosmic horror book that's sort of what's that show? Euphoria meets The King in Yellow.
Oh my
Called
God.
Game in Yellow will be coming out from Saga in next summer.
Oh, I can't wait. I cannot I'm sold. I'm there. I'm gonna have to have you back on the show to talk about that.
I'd be happy to.
Our guest has been Hailey Piper. Hailey, thank you again. It's a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks once again to Hailey Piper for being on the show. All the Hearts You Eat is out October 15th, which is next Tuesday if you're listening to this the day it comes out. So pre-order, make plans to buy it, pick it up however you can. It's one of my favorite books of the year so far. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode. We're also making plans for our 2024 Halloween special, which will be coming up the week of Halloween. We'll have more details about that soon. In the meantime, you can go to thescaresthatshapedus.com. That's where you'll find ways to contact us, ways to follow the show on social media, as well as updates on all of our previous episodes. You can follow us on Twitter at Scares Shaped Us. Find us on Facebook at Scares Shaped Us. If you have a question, a comment, a sponsorship opportunity, any and all communications you want to send my way, you can send them to scares@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. That's it for me. Hope you're enjoying your Halloween season so far, and we'll talk next time. Until then, I'm Matthew Jackson, and this is The Scares That Shaped Us.